All right, so this week, week 2, we're talking about, I called it nothing there, meaning blank areas or blank searches completely. When our dogs are hunting, they're not just hunting odor, they're hunting for odor. Okay, so it's a little bit of a semantics, but we're trying to teach our dogs that even when odor isn't there, that they're trying to look for odor. They're trying to look for that path of any sort of odor that's there. And so trying to teach them that piece is the difference I find between a dog successful in advanced excellent AKC or NW2 versus a dog that isn't successful for those things. You can easily get through lower levels without a dog that ever hunts for odor. And if you have the correct judges in AKC, you could end up with a dog in masters that has never hunted for odor because odor is just so available in some of these search areas. So it is something that we need to teach our dogs to do, especially when odor is tighter and harder to find. Okay, so blank areas. These are full searches or part of searches that have no odor or have no tangible odor for your dog. There are 3 different environments that this can happen. First one is target odor is tight and not moving away from source. You go into a room, maybe it's a exterior. Hey, let's do even an exterior search. And you have a hide that's hidden in landscape and it's one hide. It's not moving. It's holding really tight. Okay, that would be an example of where the dog goes into the space and thinks there's no odor. Can they still hunt for odor? Or do they get discouraged? Do they stress about that situation? Or maybe the hide is really elevated and it's just not dropping to their nose level because it's not a suitable elevated hide, but it's an example of what can happen and why our dogs might struggle with that kind of search. The second version would be that the area is purposely blank. And we'll talk about those examples in a bit, but that's NW3, Elite, and Masters Interior for AKC. A section of the search area does not have any hidden target odor. Okay, so this can be purposeful, but there might be odor still blowing in the space, but just no hide is in that space. So we see this all the time in detective. This is set on purpose in detective. Sometimes we see this in exteriors. We see this a lot in Elite because that kind of absence of odor can be a little bit more difficult for our dogs to work, especially when there's pooling in that space. Okay. Now, rating the changes of behavior in blank areas. So this is a little bit more difficult because not all dogs are the same. And so I can give you a full-on list, but you have to really watch your dog to try and figure out what they look like. Hint, hint, that's your homework this week. So some dogs will work harder when they're working blank spaces. Okay, so they're working deeper, they're working more intensely, maybe even slower, maybe faster. Some dogs will stress up. That's what my dog will do. They seek odor in new odor planes. They'll get faster and faster. Their breathing increases, their intensity goes up, and they keep like, whoa, maybe I'm in odor, maybe I'm in odor kind of information. Others will stress down or go to distractions, displacement, sniffing the ground, really handler focused. So that stress down kind of piece that happens. And then others will leave that space, which can occur really fast if the dog's not sensing any odor, right? And we start relying on it. Guess what? All of these behaviors are because the dog does not believe there's any more odor. That is not true about your search area necessarily. It's what the dog is perceiving. We still have to do our jobs. Okay, so what I do find is that dogs often go through a pattern when we're working blank spaces. And this is my experience as a judge, master's interior room that's blank. This is what I typically see. The first time around that search area, they work like normal. Okay, the dog is working, they're thinking, there's nothing unusual, especially if the dogs have an expectation of odor, even if it's tighter. They return to the human and they kind of check in. Okay, second time around, because now the handler goes, well, you didn't find anything, keep working. Okay, so now the dog works around the space again. They're working a little bit harder. They push into the corners. They get a little bit more detailed, maybe lower odor, maybe higher planes of odor. This is where you start seeing them pop up a little bit. They keep coming back and no results. So they check in with their handler. They're like, what are we supposed to do? I don't know. What are we supposed to do? Third time around. So a lot of handlers call finish at that point if they can read it, or they ask their dog to work harder. They work more. So now you see the stress response. You either see stress up in these moments or you see stress down in these moments. Okay. And it's trying to recognize that first time. Well, that's a little hard. Some people can call it on that first time, especially if the dogs have really worked and done a well job on that first time. Sometimes you can call it on that first time. Normally it's the second time that people call that blank or the area blank. Okay. Now, if you keep your dog in that space, the dogs can easily start working the search area based on you and your orientation. And that's where we get into trouble, especially when we're talking about tight hides and the dogs are starting to understand just us as the information instead of working the odor within the space. Another thing that can pop up is the time that they're searching can start a kind of a clock, and they hit a certain time and then they start offering behaviors. Okay. And so we have to start recognizing, does your dog have a clock on them that they start feeling that they have to find a hide at that certain time? If that's true, you need to know that time. And I would set it on your timer because if you're in that space for more than 45 seconds and your dog starts finding hides, we got a problem, right? So then you have to start recognizing, I'm at 45 seconds. I have not seen any changes of behavior. And all of a sudden my dog finds a hide. Yeah, maybe there's no real hide. Maybe my dog just made something happen because they felt like they had to by that point in time. This is training. We have to extend that time in training so that they don't feel like that has to happen. Or past reinforcement success. They really like containers. So if you haven't found a hide within the first 2 passes, they're going to find a hide in a container because it should be in a container. So they'll tell you about it. Probably the last container that they hit. Okay. All right. So where are you going to see blank searches? NACSW NW3 is the first level in NACSW that you're going to see it. You can see it in any of the 6 searches. Okay. But there's only a maximum of 1. So if you find a blank container search, you're not going to have a blank anything else search. Okay. Yeah, we're going to look at a vehicle search as blank actually. So they can show up anywhere. And the hard part is because you don't know the answers until the end of the day for NW1, you might think you found a blank in one of your first searches, and then you actually have a blank in one of your last searches. And so you make a hide happen in that last search. That's what kind of gets you at the end of the day because you don't believe your dog that it's actually blank. It is better, it's the same realistically. Okay, so we'll go through the equations. You call because you're allowed 1 mistake and you can still get a leg. So you call a space blank in the beginning, you miss 1 hide because it was tight or whatever reason. Then you get to your last search of the day. So you have your 1 strike against you. Last search of the day. If you took the risk because it seemed blank, could not find a hide, you call finish and it is blank, you still only have 1 strike against you. But if you make a hide happen in that last search because I've already have a blank, there's no way that there could be another blank, and you make a hide happen, now you got 2 strikes and you're out. So that gets to be where this whole mental game of NW3 gets to be a lot, and it's hard because you kind of have to just trust your dog in every single search as individual searches and not make too much out of it. I know a lot of people who are number counters and things like that. Working each search as individual searches can be much more effective. So here's some examples of some blank searches. Oh, this is pretty fun. So here is the first one. This is last summer, NW3. Thanks, Jason. This was an exterior. There was a bench that was moved from there to here. This was blank. I want you to recognize, is there a lot of spaces for hides to be set? It's kind of not unusual if the search area they were here. So that was a blank. There's not a lot in that space. It was actually really, really well passed. It's not actually as big as it seems. It's not. I think the teams that called finish were calling it in like 45 seconds. Like it's not that big of a space. And let me go back to the beginning. It looks really long, but this is a library. Like, it's not actually that big. It's not a huge school. And each one of these pads is probably 8 feet, right? So it's not that big of a space. It just looks really big, and we make them always bigger than the videos always seem. But yeah, there's not much in this space. Like I said, this bench got moved into here. That was it. There's not a lot of hide placements. And this is not unusual to see when we're talking about blank spaces. Okay, so here is most recently, this was Grand Junction for a double vehicle. Yeah, on things, yeah. Not in elite, but in the lower levels for sure. So here is, this one was a blank vehicle search. It's not 3 vehicles, it's just 2. They're just in a row. Nothing super complex about it. It was just recognizing that there was an odor. Okay. So there's 2 examples of blank spaces. The other blanks that I have seen in NW3 have been containers. And it's normally not a lot of containers. And it's a pretty simple space is typically where it shows up. So just kind of a thought process so that you can kind of get an idea of what those look like. Elite, we really don't see it very often. I had one in elite. I've asked it around. It doesn't happen very often at all. So here is an example of an elite blank space. This is Tana's search of it. Oops. So as she comes in, we come around the corner. I'm setting my timer. Now, here's the hard thing. Do you use a timer to call finish, or do you call finish based on your dog? So let's see if we can figure out where we're at in these blank spaces. We're still searching first rep. She's working nice. So we're back at the start. Okay, did you hear her breathing increase? And it was when I put some pressure on, I held the line. So her breathing started to increase. I would consider we're in the second rep now. See the faster motion, it's a little bit more arousal, a little bit more intensity. She's thinking she's missing something. Okay, so we're now at the other part of the locker room. So this is kind of like the first rep through here because we hadn't been here yet. Now we're kind of getting into the second because she's popping up, the arousal levels popping up again. She's like, I don't know. Where is it? Where is it? Mom, you should know. She's pulling out of the boundaries a little bit. Now we're really distracted. Weren't distracted before. Now we're really distracted. And I'm trying to figure out, is there hide over there? She's like, yeah. Okay, moving on. So my alarm starts going off. I set it for 30 seconds minus the max time. And I'm convinced I should have called it there, right? There should be a change of behavior already. This dog's strong. And she's starting to dig for like shoes and stuff. And she's like, oh, what's back here? This could be cool. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, so as soon as you released off the counter, I'm like, yeah, there's nothing. Finish. We're taking that risk and we're leaving. It's really rare to find a blank. So it was something that like kind of put us off. But here's an example of an elite blank. You can see the arousal change in her. You can see the distraction. If she's working odor, none of that happens. She just gets to work, especially in a small space like this. She should have shot out and found the hide right away. Did I need, it was 1:39 was my time in the search. Did I need 1:39? Probably not. The fastest time that was called in this search was 39 seconds. That was first place. I think it was like, I put it down here. I think it was 10th. Yeah, I was 10th. And I used my clock. Maybe if I had called it when my clock went off, I would have been like 6th. Still not great placements for being able to read that it was blank. Right? But knowing my dog, I should have set my timer much shorter to give me a reminder of like, hey, have you found any odor at 45 seconds? This dog's strong. You should find it by now. Knowing your dog and how long it takes for them to find odor in a space like this would be important. Okay, so that's an example of a blank. All right, so let's talk about AKC Masters interior. We've got 2 examples. Thank you guys for sending those. So here is, and we're just going to look at room 1 because room 1 was blank. So here's a Masters interior. Lots more odor that's happening in AKC than in ECSW. And so because there's a lot more odor, you should see a change a little bit more on the start line because there should be actual information there. So here, coming into the start, setting your time, and then asking Quinn to get going. So here's our first round, working the space. She's doing her job. She's working the space, making her little changes. So I don't know if you guys can hear, but there's like a fart ninja. It's like a noise distractor and it's hidden over here. She went past that, not even like a change in her stride. Could care less about that sound. It matters more later. Okay. So she's a little distracted, nose on the ground, but not necessarily uncharacteristic. She's just working. So we have a shake. That shake is huge. She has gone around the whole space, not had any changes of behavior, and now we have a shake. So that should be a clue. We're at 30 seconds. The search actually started at about 9 seconds in. When did you actually leave? So you left at like maybe 10 seconds. So we've been 21 seconds in the search area and a shake happened. That's a pretty good piece of information to have. Doesn't mean that we're absolutely concrete on it, but it should be, okay, we got a little check going to, is there anything in here? So now, first time around, did she care about the judge? No, not at all. She could care less about that judge. Now all of a sudden she cares. She sniffed the judge. Okay, now we got another fleck. She's also getting really sticky on Michelle. It's hard to get her off. Now, everybody cares about that fart ninja. Didn't care about it the first time. Okay, now we see that intensity go up. Maybe you have an idea. Maybe there is a hide. Maybe I missed it. But she's checking in with her handler a lot. Okay, so we're starting to see that kind of change. She took her off leash to see if maybe this will work, right? And we do that in blank spaces. Well, it's not working on leash. Let me try off leash. Maybe I'm in the way, right? And this happens a lot. So she takes her off leash to see if she can find anything. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Checking in with mom. Called, finished, and done. So we're 10 seconds in, so 1:13-ish for that first room. Okay. Now, could you have called it finish earlier? Yeah, maybe. With more experience, I think, yes, absolutely. But I think it takes a little bit, though, to go through that space. I don't think you could call it on that first round. But I do think, and this is what we have to remember when we're working through this space. So the shake at the beginning of a search is an arousal shake off. So it's what's happening out of the search, shake it off. Now I can think, now I can get going again. And sometimes it's like the equipment that causes that. All right, so we have the shake that's kind of happening in here. I don't think you could call it on the shake. But I think at this point in time is where you go, where could a hide be that I have not been? Right? Because you have worked all of it. This has been her search up until now going, I got nothing. So then you have to go, okay, where have we not been that maybe she can show me a change of behavior? So all this stuff on the left is out of play. She didn't go behind these cabinets. So that's possible. We didn't check any of the fronts of these cabinets. That could be, right? So now we're getting a little bit more purposeful. Is there somewhere that I need to put my dog's nose that maybe they haven't been? This would be a good opportunity to change direction because you went around the room first going that direction, change the direction, try it the other way. And then if we still have nothing by the time we get back to the beginning, now is a good time to call finish. Does that make sense to you guys for this one? Based on what the dog was showing that first round. All right, so then let's look at the other one. So here's a video of Gus doing the same search. All right, so coming into the space. So it's funny is he comes in with some good speed and then immediately he slows down because it's like, Oh, there's nothing. So he comes in with speed. Let's go. And I don't know. Okay, so let's look for changes in speed. He's just kind of steady speed as we go through this. What's interesting, the same path Quinn took. Got back to the beginning. Now we're getting that intensity change. Now we're in the second round. Dogs recognize that they've already gone round. It's like, okay, I missed something. Let me get a little deeper. Let me get a little bit more detailed. And look at what he's doing on this door. So I ran this one as demo dog. Tana did 2 laps very fast around here and then hit the door and started sourcing the door. Cool, there's odor in the next room. I'll call finish. Right? So for my dog, that's how I called it. So Stacy read it. She's like, oh yeah, it's coming in from the next room. That's why there's cones in front of the door. Now we're kind of working through that space. And guess where he's working back to? The door. It's the only odor in the room. I think you could have easily called it on that. Let's see where we get to. These little tails wagging. Well, this is fun. I got nothing going on here. And you're getting that intensity change a little bit. And I think it's just because he doesn't know where else to go. And he's doing a great job. So for him, he doesn't look stressed at the timing. Okay, so we called finish at 1:35. We started our search at 1:08. So about 1:30, right, for that first room. How long does it normally take for him to search to find a hide? 30 seconds?
30, 40 seconds if it's a little more complex.
Yep. There's your timer.
Yeah. And I remember either at the first, I think it was at the first time when he went over to the door and was sourcing. It's like, yeah, we're going to go there next.
Yeah, exactly. But then reasoning in our heads of like, why is that so interesting? Because there's nothing else in the whole room. Yeah. So this is a really good example of what that looks like and how that kind of presents. Are you guys like got questions about how this looks? Like, it's kind of boring, right? We're just watching blank searches, watching a dog go around a room, but it's watching what those changes are and seeing if we can predict that they're going to happen and recognizing what they look like in our own dog. We have to watch these videos. If you have an AKC Masters interior, get the video that has a blank. If you have an NW3, get the video. It might be painful to watch. I can tell you, I don't love watching my blank, but there's so much information in there. Because you're not going to learn what your dog looks like unless you have a ton of reps, what that looks like. Yeah, go for it, Jen.
So we ran it very much like Stacy, but the opposite direction. Wally went in and immediately what you pointed out about Stacy and Gus, I knew within a second there was nothing. Wally's shoulders dropped like shit.
Yeah, yeah.
And it went right to the door, proceeded to go around. But what would a judge say if you called that in those 2 seconds once you saw that?
Do it.
Really?
Okay. So here's the thing. If you have that belief and you're like, yep, my dog knows it, call it, take the risk. But it's always a risk, right? And so then you go, okay, how risk averse am I as a person? I'm pretty risk averse. I want to be sure, but that's me. I have had in searches before, I'll never forget it. It was an excellent search. And she went in, dog found one hide, and immediately she called finish in the first room. She's like, yeah, I don't care. I took the risk. And so she went into the second room. She won it by like a minute because she went into the second room immediately knowing she had 2 hides because she took the risk on one. And she was not risk averse at all. She found one hide and just decided to call finish, right? So it's, do you trust what your dog said? If my dog dropped shoulders immediately and went, oh yeah, there's nothing here, and did that, I might ask for maybe along the wall. Right? Ask for something that's going to be a tight hide that maybe he wouldn't get immediately off the bat. It wouldn't be on a table. It wouldn't be on the chair because that would be moving. So then if you believe that and you work that real quick, cool, call it. You could be done in 10 seconds. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So for Marsha, like I said, it would be the cabinets on the back that I would ask my dog to work. And that's what I did when my dog did that. So she did 2 quick laps and went to the door. I asked her to work those cabinets. She ran back to the door, finish. Because for me, I know she can go too fast that she'll go past an inaccessible in a cabinet. So I'll ask for her to work those and then I can call finish after that. Right. You're trying to look, is there high odor? No, not really. Right. So those kinds of things. Cindy, you'll have to contact Stacy in order to get those for videos. All right. So those are 2 examples of master's interior. Same room. I think it was kind of nice. I know a lot of you guys had searched those, so it's kind of nice to be able to compare and look at what those look like. All right. So that's one example. The whole room is blank and it's purposely blank. We also have a section of the search is blank, and this can happen on purpose. This can happen just because of large search areas, which can happen in detective, but typically these are set on purpose because it's a challenge. It's a challenge that's listed in the judge's guidelines. It's a challenge that's listed in guidelines for NACSW COs, that a challenge of a blank space within a large search area. So in those spaces, we have different kinds of challenges. We have blowing, pooling odor. So just because it's blank doesn't mean that there isn't odor, and it's up to the handler to recognize, is my dog working source in this space, or is my dog working odor that's blowing from somewhere else, right? We have to recognize that. And we've played with that in previous session, right? Yeah. Novel odor and distraction. If you don't have odor in that space, it is very easy for your dog to start to get distracted, right? There's nothing pulling them in. There's nothing that's going to distract them, give them focus. And so if you keep asking them to work that space, they can get very distracted in the space, like grass. Grass is going to do something like that. When you apply your pressure, it becomes more distracting typically. If you release that pressure and a dog shoots out of the space, maybe there's nothing there. It might be time to follow your dog. Handler not believing. Right? So if you are in a blank space and you don't believe that it's blank and you think, well, there's got to be a hide in here because there's always going to be a hide, you might create a hide, right? Because we're trying to orient our dogs. We're squaring up. We're asking our dogs to work again and again, objects that we think should have hides. And so then that becomes a problem. And then expectation of target odor. So that's on dog. That's on the dog just kind of having an idea of where odors should be, like containers or buried, like the last containers that could possibly pop up, or where we square up, or maybe it's patterned. So here's an example. I don't have a clear video of it, but it's a pattern that happened to me in regionals. It was weird. I've never had this happen with her before or since, but it's something that popped up. We had, these are like little hand, like wagons, carts that were used to clean at this fairgrounds. And so in the search for master's interior, there was a cart that had hides on it. And I think this was the first day, there was 2 hides on them. And Tana had that very specific location and she hit it. And so, or actually I missed it. And so I asked her to work it. So I faced it and I asked her to work that space, rewarded her for it, which I don't normally do. And it was kind of weird that I did it. Well, in the master's interior for the next day, there was a card in there and she hit it really strong. She hit it. And I got really surprised because I got to know. And it was because, I think, because of that memory. I can't think of what else it was. There was enough cards. It wasn't a reused card. It wasn't odor. It was just a memory of where she thought that that hide should be. It's a weird thing. Should I train for it? No. It was just a weird thing that happened once. It's never happened since. So it's not something that I'm going to worry about, but it's something that happened. Okay. So let's look at some examples of these kinds of things. Here is half the space is blank and excellent. There's a lot of objects and a lot of things that can cause false alerts. But here's an example of what it could look like. So this is actually that search where that woman took a risk, which is really kind of funny. So here's the search area.
Is there sound to this?
Yeah, not much. It's just me blabbering. It's not worth listening to. Seeing the whole space. There's one hide. It was deep on this chair. Okay. That was it in this full search area. The challenge of the search area was that there wasn't much odor. Right. And so that was the purposeful challenge in the set, because once they got into this pocket, they just have to pass the plane of this. The dogs all were able to source, but they had to get there first. And that was kind of the challenge of that search. So some of these. Okay. So then let's look at another example of kind of purpose. Here's a detective. This was a purposely set blowing odor problem. So here's the door in the search area. Come on, look up, look up. So there was a single, no, there's two hides in here. So there's one on the playhouse over here. It was down here, and then there was one over here. And the rest of the space out here was all blank. Okay. And so this was purposely set so that the dogs had to work the blank space to the right here as she pans around. So all of this was catching odor. Everything back here was catching odor. And that was the challenge of the search, is that there was no odor on all these chairs, on any of the space over here, and it was blowing in from somewhere else. And so it was a matter of the dogs working that odor and understanding that there was no source there. It was a fun search. Okay, and then here's a master's or a NW3 search in Meeker. And this one was a tricky one too. So the hide was over here on this step over here. Nothing else was in this space. This is debrief. Debrief from yourself. I'm gonna let her.
Steps. The challenge of this area was the high ceilings. This was also where the dish was being held inside the refrigerator. Refrigerator was running. We had food in it for volunteers. We had this refrigerator that's plugged in as well. So you had both of those refrigerators for such. The sink had a vent. The ceiling was sucking around the too. So you have a lot of tracking on this end of the stage. So I hope you guys.
Okay. Sorry, it seems like you guys aren't hearing that one. In general, one hide on the steps over here, and the vent that's up top was pulling it into the stage. Plus you had the refrigerators that were both on and causing a lot of air motion through here. This whole space is empty. That was worked. The only hide was way back here, and the dog had to get back here to work it. There was a lot of false alerts up here. And it was because people wanted the alerts on the tables and chairs, not because there was odor up there. So that's a really good example of something we see quite frequently, even though it's not a blank, it has that blank quality that we have to trust our dogs and be able to move through those spaces without make hides happen. Okay. All right. So let's talk about it. What should we do? Calling finish is hard. It's a risk. We have to be able to put our risks on what we want them to do. There are a lot of people that I know that would like to train their dogs to tell them that they're done. Okay, so just saying, cool, we're done. And then the human would just take that answer and say, okay, I'll call finish now. Thank you. Just like an alert. Here's the problem about that situation. The dog can only tell you what they've perceived. That doesn't mean that they've covered the whole space. That doesn't mean that they aren't missing something. And what happens in these situations is that the people say that their dog lied. But the dog isn't lying. The dog is telling you what they know. And it's what they're trained to do. So we have to recognize that that piece is there. And the ownership is still on us to cover the space and make sure that our dog has been everywhere if we want to rely that information. Does it mean that we shouldn't train something kind of along that line? It's not necessarily. I think it's actually not a bad thing. But we have to recognize that it's a partnership and that the responsibility to call finish is not just on your dog. It is on you, and it is on your ability to read the space. Okay. I don't think that it's fair to do that just on your dog. So When we think about our responsibility, it's space management. Have you gone everywhere? Have they searched everywhere? Not just been everywhere, have they searched everywhere? So corners, thresholds, perimeter, random thing in the middle of the room. Have you faced it? Because I find a lot of people do not even face the random thing in the middle of the room, and then they miss a hide. So those kind of things are quite important. Time management. How close are you to your max time? If you've only spent 30 seconds and it's a huge space and you really haven't really covered it very well, don't call finish unless you really have that belief that you think you're done. Maybe you could use a little bit more time to push a little bit deeper, right? So recognize how close you are. If you have always gone to your max time, and that's kind of a standard for how you do it, you hear the 30-second warning, or you are watching your watch and you've got 2 seconds left, so you call finish, chances are you either have a slower dog or you're spending too much time and you're not reading your dog when they're done a space within the search. Keep moving through the search area and it's probably going to finish a little bit sooner, right? Max time is a symptom of not trusting yourself or your dog or your experiences because you've missed something in the past, not taking risks, right? So then you just keep working until you get the 30-second call. I see this a lot in NECSW. People don't want to push that limit because they don't care to. And so then they'll just keep working until they hear the 30-second warning and they go, yeah, I'm done. I'll call finish now, right? I see that a lot in elite. Not knowing how to read your dog yet, right? So building up that experience and then observational skills, or struggling with your dog not working. That's a big thing, right? So if your dog's not working, then how are you supposed to be able to feel confident about your call? That's hard, and I get that. I think that's a separate issue than necessarily everything else on this list. So the third one is what we have to be doing is changes of behavior. Do you have any changes of behavior that don't match with what you've found? So this is like when you know how much, or you have searched and you found a few hides. Are all the changes of behavior you found relating to the ones you found, or is it kind of outlying? Is there something else that maybe you should just kind of ask before you call finish? What are you waiting for? Right? So are we thinking about moving forward? Are we thinking about moving through our space, or are we just standing and watching our dog? And I think we have to recognize that our impact of how we handle can impact our dogs, whether they're staying somewhere or whether they're moving through a search area. Dogs will stay because we're not moving. Dogs will stay because we've squared up, and that becomes a problem because the dogs get stuck. We want to train our dogs to move forward. We want them to always be thinking and moving us through these spaces. That's the goal. And that's why we sometimes handler proof these things, which is going to be one of the things we're doing this session. But we have to make sure that we're being aware that when we are just standing watching, that we're kind of a bump on the log and we might be in the way. Okay. So training the finish. Your dog will do what they're rewarded to do. I don't think that there's any perfect answer to this. And I do think it's always a depends, right? It depends on your dog. It depends on whatever. But just be aware of it. But I do think that if you call finish, it is a reward. It does add value to whatever your dog was doing when you say the finish, because it releases them out of that space. If your dog is actively sniffing a cold box and you say finish, you have just added value to that cold box. If your dog is sniffing the ground or going to a distraction and you call finish when they go to a distraction, you could add value to that distraction, right? It doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It just means that you have to be aware of what that impact can be for your dog. So here's like really, to me, 4 good reasons to call finish, but also that there is some trouble that could pop up from any of these. So dog checks in with no more odor. Dog looks at you. And we saw that a lot in that master's interior. Dog checks with owner. Okay, so then the handler calls when the dog looks at the owner, and that's normally what we call as a finish call. The problem is that if we don't balance this, that the dog needs to be working and trying to find that deeper hide before they check in with you. If your dog just goes into a room and goes, nah, I don't really smell anything, and you call it on that, we got a problem. The dog needs to say, okay, I've covered it. I can't find anything else. Now what do we do? Cool. That's a perfect finish call to call. Okay, what about dog leaves the search area with no more odor? This can happen really fast, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a tight hide somewhere. It just means that they're not catching odor at the start. Okay, cool. That's good to know. Or they're fast spin around the room. They move so fast that they couldn't catch anything deeper. but there's nothing obvious, right? So those kind of pieces of information are good. Or maybe they're trying to work to the edge of an odor cone if it's really strong in that room. And that can happen. And I think we don't recognize that when that could happen. All right, how about dog returns to a found hide? To me, that's a really safe spot to call finish, honestly, because it just means you're not training a bad behavior, right? Your dog's training just to go to found hide. The hard part about this one is that it can create a dog that struggles to leave a hide, right? I would reward for a blank room because your dog worked for you. When you call finish, get your dog on you, give them a cookie or a toy to move on to the next room, right? I do think that that's worth their time. Okay, dog goes to a distraction. Otherwise, that was not interesting. Handler calls finish, right? But make sure that you think about your space first. Typically, if a handler is going to call finish because their dog goes to a distraction, it's because the dog didn't care about the distraction before, and now it goes to the distraction, and you've kind of cleared your space, and so you're using the excuse. That's not bad, but it could possibly draw your dog to distractions a little bit more easily than otherwise they might not. Depends on the dog. George, easily distractible with toys. I'm not going to call finish on a distraction. Sorry, I don't need to train him to go find more toys. He likes toys. But if he goes to like a weird little spot on the ground to just kind of sniff again because he doesn't know what else to do, that might be a good finish call for him, right? It depends on your dog, depends on what their tendencies are. Here's a little story time. You get what you reward. Tana, I judge all the time. She works demo for me. What have I taught my dog to do? Work past the last found hide and find distractions. That's what she's trained to do, because that's what she has to do for me for demo. But what have I untrained is her connecting with me after she's found all the hides. How do I call finish with a dog that does that, right? So now I'm trying to understand, okay, we've been everywhere. I'm not seeing any new changes of behavior. Okay, now I can call finish. That's how I'm calling finish. But it's a lot of risk on me. I'm not getting anything on the dog's end to tell me, well, she can't find anything else. Once I realized that, I started rewarding my dog for the last find that she found and connecting with me. And then I asked her to find distractions for demo work. Once I started doing that, now my dog tells me when she's done. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. You get what you're rewarded to do. So it's just kind of a lesson of recognize that the opposite can happen. You call finish on the last box because you hit the last box. Your dog is going to put value on the last box. They're going to start asking you questions. Can you call finish now on the last box? Well, that starts looking like an alert. Be very aware of where you put that finish call, or if you're not putting a finish call and what you're training. Okay. All right. So your assignments this week, there's 2 of them. First one is a blank or not. Okay. So I want you to find a search area. Shouldn't have hides been set anytime recently. And I want you to have it blank. Set a timer and work it for a minute. This may feel like forever for you and your dog. Work a minute because this, like we just saw, nobody called that search under a minute. It wasn't a very complex room. There was not a lot in that room. There was not even any changes of behavior. It was still over a minute for both dogs, which is not unusual. That's typical. That's normal what it's out there. But when we do it in training, we rarely keep our dogs working even past 20 seconds. Recognize that difference. So I want you to set that search, set it a minute, and work your dog. Once you call finish, reward your dog. Verbal, even if you want to, or you could praise, or you could food, okay? Put them up. And I want you to look at that space. And you should be looking at that space because you're stuck in there for a full minute. Where could a hide be put that you wouldn't know about? Where would that hide be set? So like in the chat, when we were looking at those other ones, Marcia said, well, what about in accessibles? Totally. That would be the hide that you would set. What about one in the cabinet? Maybe your question would be a high hide. Maybe your question would be a deep hide. Maybe it would be down near the ground because of the carpet. Recognize where is that hide for you and your team and set that, okay? Then work it again in video. I want you to see, right? Look at that change. So I've got 3 questions for you. What behaviors do you see in your dog after the first round of searching? Do they detail more or do they go into high stress? So this is for your blank one. What happens after that first round? What kind of changes are they doing? Second question, How many times does your dog check in with you within that minute? How many times do you see them leave? Here's like a little tally board. Those are kind of fun to start tallying once we start recognizing them. And then after setting your hide and running it, what changes of behavior do you see that looks different than your blank search? Your dog is probably going to come into that blank search or that odor search now with an expectation it's still blank. So they might not want to work. So you got a little bit of an extra hang up. But otherwise, I want you to look, what is different about that space? What does your dog do differently on the start line within the first 2 seconds of the search? And then assignment 2. It's a shell game. This one you're going to need a partner for. So whether it's somebody in your house or whether you team up with somebody and you use 2 exterior spaces or 2 interior, whatever. But I want you to team up. You're going to use 2 rooms that have doors or 2 spaces that you can limit access and that you're not having odor blow over. And your partner is going to set one hide in one of the rooms. If it's somebody who does not do nose work, I've given you some parameters, okay? Just so that you don't get some weird thing that you never thought that a hide could be set, because that's what happens when you have somebody that doesn't know nose work set hides. You're gonna get something really random, like in a shoe that's in a cabinet. See how it goes, right? So you get weird stuff like that. But flip a coin and determine which room you do first based on the coin. Okay, so this is acting like a blind search so that you're not even getting influence from that partner. And then search the room with 1 minute limit. Give yourself a 30-second warning. Okay, so set your timer for 30 seconds past a minute or under a minute. If your partner is around, they can time for you. Okay, then without knowing you're right, you hit a minute, get them out and search room 2 immediately. Same 1 minute time. I want you to look at this, and hopefully you can video if you can't, not a big deal, but I want you to figure out at what point did you suspect that room that you're in was blank? Look at your timer, figure out what that time is, or if you're videoing, say it out loud, I think it's blank, as your dog is working, so that you know that point in time when you come back to it on your video. What point did you know it was blank? So when do you have the first inkling and when do you know? Okay. If you want a challenge, give yourself only 30 seconds to work that in a very large space. Okay, then you're cutting that time even shorter to try and make that call. Any question about your homework? It's kind of a fun homework to do. No? All right. I'm going to end the recording there.